Hi everyone, welcome to episode 32 of the Future of Work show, where we've invited amazing guests from all over the world to come and sit with us every week and discuss topics that have great interest for our developing future. And for those of you who are joining us for the very first time, hi, I'm Shalini. I'm the co-founder of Uncube, an education and advisory firm around the future of work. I work there along with my colleagues, Jaspreet Bindra and Papia Banerjee. We also do a great series of leadership talks around the future of work, understanding global megatrends and their implications on organizations. So if you or your leadership team is interested in reaching out to us for that, please do. We're available on LinkedIn. And with that, let's jump into the topic of today. Now, I came across the guest we have on today, Professor Philipp Cornelius of Rotterdam School of Management, while browsing an article in Sloan Management Review around frontline innovation. Now, frontline innovation is a topic that has been very close to my heart, partly because I did a lot of my doctoral research in that area. So I was super excited, and I think he has some amazing findings to share with us. I reached out to him, and to our absolute joy, he's agreed to come on the show. So I'm just going to get him on.
Hi, Shalini.
Hi, Philip. I'm so glad that you were able to join us. Thank you so much.
Thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks, Philip. So, one of the things I was so excited when I read your article, very few people focus on frontline innovation. The entire conversation around innovation, particularly over the last 5 or 10 years, has focused around innovation strategy, very top-down, planning of innovation. Of course, the conversation around, tools like design thinking, lean startup, agile have also become extremely central to the conversation around innovation. But somehow, in all of this, we've missed out on much conversation around frontline innovation. So my first question to you is, what got you interested in frontline innovation? And also wondering if you have any thoughts around how that's a topic that sort of skipped attention the last several years.
Yeah, very good question. Thank you. How do we get started with this research? Well, first of all, I think that in the end, every employee can make a difference to companies and to innovation companies. Employees are the ones on the ground working with the machines or with the customers. They have the first-hand experience, and so usually it's these employees who can come up with the best ideas on how to improve the processes or the products. And then we kind of got in touch with this large car parts manufacturer, and they actually have an exemplary employee innovation program set up. So they really focus on their employees. They really try to involve them in every part of the innovation process. And on top of that, they had a fantastic data set that allowed us to study this rigorously and get some, robust and reliable insight into this. Why is that not? Why is frontline innovation not such a big topic maybe in strategy conversations? First of all, maybe it's not quite as sexy as the big R&D projects that everyone wants to pursue. And maybe it's also not as easy to understand if you're a senior executive how you can even measure or track frontline innovation. It's easier to commission a project that maybe has gone through stakeholder review, that ticks all the boxes, that's kind of aligned with your strategy, that you can communicate to your shareholders, rather than trying to figure out how to get your frontline employees really involved in innovation and stimulate their creativity.
Yeah. So I read in the article you had stated a very interesting statistic that in the organization you studied and other large organizations, something like 75% of all innovation ideas, in fact, come from non-R&D employees and employees who perhaps in many ways are frontline employees.
Yes, that was actually a study by a colleague of mine. And they looked at a couple of manufacturing companies and in many established manufacturing industries. So industries that have been going for a couple of years, couple of decades. really, and kind of the largest part of productivity gains comes from frontline employees, just because these are the guys who actually work with the machines. These are the guys who know how to improve the machines, how to improve the processes. So that's kind of where that comes from.
Now that's an amazing statistic, because it sort of highlights the fact that there is such a huge area of innovation that we have tended to sort of lose sight of in the conversation around innovation, whereas it's right there. And if something like 75% of ideas are coming more as emergent innovation ideas, or ideas that are bottom up in their
exactly. Yeah,
I think that's quite an interesting it's an interesting stat that actually forces all of us to rethink how we are thinking of innovation strategy in the first
absolutely.
place.
I mean, we've known that kind of accumulated experience can change productivity, right? So kind of the learning curve principle, that's something we've known for a long time. But initially, economists and managers assume that's something that just happens by itself, but it's actually not. It's actually your employees on the shop floor that make an effort, that look at how things could be improved, and then that bring this idea towards management, pitch it essentially, and figure out how to implement it. So it's not something that just happens. It's something that can be encouraged and that can be stimulated.
No, I think that's fascinating, Philip, and I really liked the article that you published in Sloan, and of course you've also shared with our audience on the LinkedIn event page. Would you mind sharing a little bit about the research project itself and some of the key findings from it, because I found them very, very interesting.
Yeah, so we started out from kind of that study by my colleague that found these large gains of productivity from frontline employees. And then we were looking around a little bit, especially in the operations management literature, and there's actually very little advice about how management can support this effectively. And then we got in touch with this company and got this amazing data set, and then we found that actually by moving employees around between different factories. So this is a large manufacturer. They have, I think, 13, 14 factories internationally, all over the world. And sometimes they moved employees between these factories. And we saw actually after these moves, huge increases in innovation by these moving employees. So in the month that an employee was moved to a different factory, they actually increased their innovation output. And this is hard money by 100,000 euros. And this is hard money. This is measured by the accounting department towards actual expenditure in the factory. So just by moving, the employee, for some reason, had this amazing innovation boost and really, made a difference to the bottom line of that company.
And you also spoke about how that wasn't just a short-term increase.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. So probably what's happening here is knowledge sharing, right? So an employee takes his knowledge from his plant to the other plant, and thereby kind of, dissipates the knowledge that, is already in the firm and contributes to innovation through that means. But actually what's really surprising is that after an employee was moved to a different factory and then returned to his home factory, he continued to be more innovative than his colleagues, actually by 20,000 euros every single month. And we studied the company for 4 years, and this value never went down. So really what's happening is here that employees become better innovators by moving in the company.
That's the finding that I found extremely fascinating, because it has huge implications for the way organizations can think of their innovation strategy. Supplementing a top-down innovation strategy with a much more conscious effort to building the kind of systems, processes, and probably culture that's going to support bottom-up innovation. And
absolutely.
And the fact that this wasn't something that was a one-time game, but the fact that having moved, and if I remember correctly, in your study, they were working in another plant just for 2 weeks. So it wasn't a long period of time. It was
exactly
short. And just worked somewhere for 2 weeks, becoming more innovative over a long period of time. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah. So I think you mentioned innovation strategy, but I think it's not just innovation strategy. It's actually people strategy, because the way companies think about their frontline employees is that they can learn how to become better at their jobs, right? So this is kind of related to productivity. But what we're actually showing is that employees can learn to become better innovators, and it's a whole new perspective of how you manage and how you employ your frontline employees.
And actually, that's the point I want to explore more with you. If an organization wanted to embed practices like this across so that their frontline employees can become better innovators, there's the one example that you've studied, which is when you're simply transferred to another plant for 2 weeks and you come back. So inter-plant transfer, something like earlier idea of job rotation, which has, probably not been spoken about as much in recent years. But what are other things that organizations you think can do from a cultural perspective or from other processes which would build the innovation capacity across the board?
Yeah, no, I think essentially if we talk about organizational culture, it's essentially about three things to me. It's first of all that you kind of have to empower your employees. So that's something like related to openness. You have to encourage employees to treat their job not just as kind of the immediate thing that they have to do, but see it a bit broader essentially. So take ownership of problems they encounter maybe on the production line or in a service setting, and take ownership of these problems and then come up with ideas on how to improve them. And also kind of encourage employees to do this step, right? We always assume that as soon as companies are open, employees are going to start innovating, but it's also about kind of telling them that the company values their ideas and giving them the confidence that they can actually improve. So that's the first part. I would call that kind of empowering the employees. And then it's about enriched jobs, and that kind of also connects to something I just said, that jobs shouldn't be too narrowly defined. If you have an employee in the production line, you tell them this, these couple of moves is the only thing you're going to do. Probably the employee won't accumulate the experience on the factory floor that they can actually start contributing innovative ideas on how to improve it. So really, this is about kind of narrowly versus broadly defined jobs. And I think it's better if jobs are broader, more varied, and more complex, because that really stimulates the employee to think about the larger picture essentially, and kind of try and come up with ways to improve it. So these two things, actually, if you combine them, it's all about organizational flexibility. And understand, of course, we know manufacturing is, under price pressure. So not every manufacturing company can be as flexible, let's say, as, Alphabet's X company, right? That's not what we want. But it's about kind of giving employees a little bit more ownership, a little bit more responsibility of what they're doing, and possibly also opening up communication channels that aren't just top down, but also bottom up. And also maybe between factory lines or between factories, as we show in our research. So I think it's these three things that really revolve around organizational flexibility.
Philipp, can you speak a little bit about, in your paper you speak about the know why and the know how, and how both of these are enhanced when employees move to another location. Could you just share a little bit about that too?
Yeah. So this is kind of digs a bit deeper into, we talked earlier about the two mechanisms that we see from interplant transfers, this knowledge transfer and this learning effect. And essentially these trace back to different kinds of knowledge that your employees can have. So there's know-how, which means you know how a certain machine works. And there's know-why, which is kind of a causal understanding of why this combination of maybe a process and a machine together creates a certain kind of output. And as you can imagine, know-why is actually much more valuable, because you don't just understand the immediate setting, but you would also understand, for example, how the machine would work in a different setting, maybe for a different product or a different configuration. And what we see is that actually by moving employees between factories, these employees develop a better understanding of how the manufacturing process works in this company. Yeah, so they develop this causal understanding of how these things fit together, and as a result, they become much better at improving them. It's it's about mental models essentially, right? So we all have mental models about the world around us in our heads. We use them to kind of make predictions and to understand what's happening. And the way we build these mental models is just by observing different things. We go outside and we see stuff. That's how we build these mental models. And it's exactly the same thing for employees. The more they see of the company, the better they understand the business model, and the better they can contribute to improving it.
Would you say that there are some kinds of organization cultures that are much more conducive to bottom-up innovation? I know you've touched upon it in your earlier, discussion about how culture contributes, but just more broadly across manufacturing, what kinds of organizations do you think would bottom-up innovation really prosper in?
What do you have in mind here? So I think it's essentially again about openness and appreciation for the frontline, not treating them as, not treating your employees as a cog in a machine, but as someone who can contribute more than just the immediate task, right? Who can really make a difference in the company. I think that's kind of it's really about, trusting your employees, I think.
I think, some of the conversations around what it takes to build an innovation culture really do speak to some of, how open is an environment, how easy is it to exchange ideas, how seriously are ideas taken when exchanged, or are you asked to sort of, stick to your lane, or, allowed the opportunity to apply ideas from one setting to the other. Those seem, perhaps to be, some of the factors that might be adding up to a more.
Absolutely. So it's really about, if you have it's not just about a suggestion box where employees can put ideas and then no one ever looks at it. You need to, I guess, kind of invest into that a little bit, just like an innovation project in general, right? So you need to have staff evaluating these ideas, and you need to communicate that also to your frontline staff that, they are taken seriously and their ideas are evaluated and the best ones are implemented.
Yeah. In fact, to add to that, about 15 years ago, I had studied an organization which had gone through a large-scale transformation, and they'd combined a top-down with a bottom-up approach. And in that bottom-up approach, they had over 100,000 ideas which came up. So much of it is like, people will come up with ideas if you ask them to, or if they think that those ideas are valuable. Now, obviously, not all of those ideas will necessarily be implementable or even be good ideas. But the moment you open out the space and you tell people that, we care, we think you have a perspective that's different from perhaps the perspective we have, just creating that space opens out the opportunity for people to contribute.
Absolutely. Yeah. So in our data set, actually, I think about 30% of ideas were essentially net positive in terms of cost savings. So what the company does is they have the accounting department look at the ideas and kind of calculate the investment costs and subtract that from the potential savings. And if an idea is net positive, they implement it. And in our sample, it's about 30% of ideas that kind of satisfy this criteria. And as you saw from these earlier figures I mentioned, some of these ideas are incredibly valuable, saving millions of euros for this European company. Sorry.
So I'm going to just take a few questions. Anbarasu, hi, how are you? Thank you for joining us. Christopher, some companies have introduced the concept of idea portals and incentivized this for some of the best ideas. Have you seen this as an emerging trend?
Yeah, good question. So rewards in general is actually an open research question. So should you incentivize, should you reward your employees for ideas? And there is conflicting research actually that tells you about how little attention this topic has received in general, actually also in the academic community. So I had a look at this actually before our chat today. And essentially what they say is, one study says incentives can increase the number of ideas, but not necessarily the quality. And the other study says essentially the opposite. Incentives can increase the kind of the top end quality, but not the number of ideas. So it is, I would say, it probably depends on the situation the company is in. How much, loyalty and buy-in do you have from your employees already? If your employees, think this, maybe they already think this is part of their job to help improve the company, then probably incentives won't make a big difference, right? But possibly if you have disengaged employees, then maybe rewards could work.
That's interesting. So you're saying that, the evidence is mixed. We aren't entirely sure. And it's worth trying where maybe the natural flow of ideas from the bottom up isn't as strong.
Exactly. Yeah.
Ajay Saraswat, hi, thank you for joining. Toyota has this culture. They analyze all problems at the source, the shop floor. And I know, Philip, you also spoke a little bit about the Toyota system in our pre-interview. Any response to, how the Toyota way of management of the shop floor in any way connects with frontline productivity?
Absolutely. I think, Toyota has certainly been a trailblazer in terms of empowering their frontline staff. I guess the original Toyota approach is more firmly towards quality, but actually I think, maybe the way Toyota implements it, they recognize this also as innovation, but maybe this is partly missing from kind of the way we talk about it. Because really it's not just about, improving quality. Employees can also come up with ideas that are unrelated to quality, just related to efficiency, for example, right? Or, how to improve the product. Essentially, that's kind of how we started actually this conversation. I think any employee can have any idea that is in the end valuable to the company. It's about encouraging and finding those valuable ideas and then implementing them.
Yeah. No, that's so well said, Philip, because a lot of the Japanese systems of management are exceptional at quality in particular. That's their prime focus, quality.
Yeah.
And, they are methods which have been great at getting involvement from frontline shop floor employees, on a regular basis. But they just haven't looked at it from an innovation perspective, even though I'm sure there's a big overlap between the two.
I think so. Much of the academic literature, at least on kind of the Toyota production system and Kaizen, is also, I have to say, fairly old, right? So these systems surely have evolved. But having said that, I read a recent study in one of the top economics journals on an American car manufacturer. And they are actually very critical of any sort of frontline involvement in innovation. So essentially, there's the stance they take. It's an empirical study as well, so they do look at data. But the stance they take is essentially that frontline employees do not embody any of the knowledge that would be relevant to kind of drive improvement. And that's something that I think we have quite powerful evidence to the contrary.
Yeah, that's an unusual idea, I would say.
Yeah.
Parag, hi, thanks for joining. Very relevant in logistics and port sector. This is the order of the day, and effectively executing FLI entails a lot of things. I think you're absolutely right, Parag, particularly in those fields. Is innovation always required for problem solving? Can too much innovation be an overkill? Now, that's an interesting question.
Right. Yeah, possibly. In the end, this is about essentially idea selection. And this is a difficult question. Idea selection, wherever you are, is always difficult, right? If you're an entrepreneur, or if you're a manager selecting an innovation project, or if you're a manager trying to evaluate all your 100,000s of frontline innovation ideas, right? So how do you do that effectively? And I think that's something where actually analytics comes in increasingly to make people's lives easier.
And actually, I'm going to ask you that's a perfect segue into how analytics is a new method of, perhaps storing up innovation cultures and processes. So would love to hear, Philip, your thoughts around how analytics plays into innovation today.
Yeah, so I think essentially, if you think about analytics, there are three parts where it can make a difference in frontline innovation specifically. So first of all, it's about actually giving frontline employees access to data that they can use to kind of substantiate their ideas with, right? So maybe production data that allows them to figure out some kind of, leeway to improve the process. The second part, and most important part, and that we just, hinted at, is how do you evaluate ideas? And I'm going to come back to that in a second. And then the third part is how do you track the implementation of ideas? If you have 100,000 frontline ideas, maybe you implement 30,000 of those. How do you have to track that they actually generate the value that you thought they would, generate the cost savings that you thought they would. And so in the second part, there's how do you evaluate ideas? And I think there's essentially two things you can do, right? First of all, you want to kind of get control of this large amount of unstructured data that's actually in ideas, right? So often ideas are described in text, in free form text, so people, can write, and how do you put that in data? And as we know, there's quite a bit of advancement in terms of how we can handle unstructured data in machine learning these days. And especially if you look at the innovation analytics, actually what people are doing a lot is using topic modeling, LDA, to kind of get hold of, get an understanding of what is in this unstructured textual data on ideas. So that's one thing. And then when you kind of, have worked through this data engineering part, I think it's about building models that can help you come through, your hundreds of thousands of ideas and pick the ones that are most likely to be valuable. So ideally, you build a prediction model. You have a data scientist do that for you, and you feed it with all the data that you have on your ideas, possibly connected to your production lines immediately, even if you have the Internet of Things already connected and you have a lot of data that comes from your production lines. You can connect that into the model and to the idea. And hopefully that kind of will make it easier to spot ideas that are valuable. And the nice thing about this is then, if you have humans actually then look at the best ideas and track them, if they have actually generated value, you kind of keep improving. You can keep improving this model, and you kind of get this nice circle where you have better models that allow you to identify better ideas, you get better data, and you improve your models, and it kind of becomes a self-improving process.
Are many organizations actually doing this, Philipp?
I think this is very much cutting edge, yes. So innovation analytics is starting to make a difference in consumer research, where you analyze, just like I said, large amounts of unstructured data of consumer reviews or blogs. People are looking at Twitter, people are looking at Amazon reviews and stuff like that to find trends for what consumers like. But fundamentally, the same techniques you can apply to frontline innovation, right? In the end, you're talking to a large number of people and trying to, find the good ideas amongst those.
Yeah, actually, it does make perfect sense, simply because, if you're a large enough organization, the sheer volume of ideas, and then, the help in both prediction of which of these ideas might have the biggest payoff, and of course then tracking. So it makes a lot of sense. But the reason I asked was I hadn't heard as much of this as yet. But I think it's probably just a matter of time, because it's just needs so much.
Yeah, it's complicated actually, and so people are still trying to figure out how to do it. But there are actually three colleagues from Austria who wrote a very nice case study with 4 cases in Business Horizons, and they focus on customer analytics essentially. So how do you use customer data to drive your innovation process? But essentially, their insights are also applicable to frontline staff. So I'm happy to share that later on the LinkedIn page.
That makes a lot of sense. And do you think that might bring back a sort of revival, to the focus on bottom-up innovation?
It could be. One of the reasons maybe why it hasn't received so much attention is because it's difficult to track, and it requires a lot of investment actually in evaluation of these ideas. If that becomes cheaper and easier to track, then possibly it's back on the agenda of senior executives.
Yeah. Papia, hi Papia. Being in touch with the customers generates ideas for improvement and influences innovation. Absolutely. Raman says being responsive to market requirements is important. Absolutely. Christopher has another question. Says, I've worked in software product space, and a lot of innovation is driven by industry analysts and reports. Is that a general thumb rule, regardless of the industry segment as well?
A rule of thumb for what?
I think he's asking that in the software product space, it's the industry analysts and their reports which drives a lot of innovation. Would that be true of industries as well?
Interesting. I have not heard of this approach in maybe the more traditional manufacturing sector, but that's very interesting. Yeah.
Dr. Lab Singh, future of work depends on the ethical aspects of the business you're in. What do you feel of the future of ethics in business? I don't know, Philipp, if this is a topic that you want to take a stab at.
I can talk about my personal opinion here rather than my research. I think ethics is incredibly important in business these days, right? We've certainly made great progress from the early days of the last century to where we are today in terms of the morality of business, right? In the end, we all living on the same planet and we're in the same boat. So creating a business that doesn't exploit some parts of the world or the environment, I think should be the goal for anyone who creates business these days.
Let me add the element that not necessarily in the kind of analytics you were speaking about, but in the other branches of analytics, with people analytics becoming so central to conversations around the way careers are designed or promotion decisions are made, or for instance, so that's very sensitive data. I think there's probably a bit of catch up that's going to happen. The tools are still fairly new and people are experimenting with how things work. I don't think we have had a mature enough conversation around the ethics of use of a lot of that data as yet. I'm sure it's around the corner, but it's just that, it hasn't reached that place as yet. So I think with data, particularly some kinds of data, being fairly sensitive, there's a whole series of conversations around ethics that is very much a part of the future of work. We just haven't, I don't think we're necessarily there as yet.
Yeah, it's actually very hot research topic these days. There is now, we're now finally seeing kind of these, top end research articles coming out that are peer reviewed and that talk about different aspects of ethics in data analytics. We actually have a PhD now in our school that looks at this specifically this topic, and we have a couple of colleagues doing research into that. And whenever data on people is involved, especially if you have many of those, thousands of those, it becomes kind of sensitive. Especially, people analytics. Whenever you have an algorithm making decisions about hiring or about remuneration, you have to be very careful to not have any biases. Maybe not even amongst the analysts who implement this algorithm, but also just within the data, right? That can kind of come back and haunt you. So definitely, absolutely a huge topic, very important.
Huge topic. So Philipp, my last question to you. This whole year was such an unusual year with the pandemic. And so many organizations have been forced to, innovate out of necessity because, whatever they used to do couldn't be done anymore, either because of lockdowns in different countries or supply chains got broken or, for other reasons. Do you think some of the, innovation that's happened in the last year is likely to have an impact on the innovation capacity of organizations?
I think so, yeah. And that actually is also, again, a very nice segue, because I can also connect that to a little bit more about the research we've done. So first of all, about COVID, yes, I think it will have a huge impact on innovation. The reason is very simple. We have the best ideas when we take new perspectives and when we leave our comfort zones. No one has a good idea sitting in front of their computer and looking at the work they've been doing for the past 2 weeks. It's the same for me. I write research. Kind of, it's my business to come up with new ideas. And the best ideas I have when I go for a run or I go to the mountains or anything that is away from my desk. And COVID has been horrible for millions of people. It has cost millions of lives. It has cost even more jobs. But what it has certainly done is put us out of our comfort zone and give us new perspectives on especially the role of work, your show, and how it connects to technology. So I actually would expect quite a bit of innovation in that space. We're all using Zoom these days. I personally think it's still a very rudimentary software for something that has become so important. And I think we will see a lot of innovation coming in that space. For example, I just read a study by a psychologist a week or two ago that I've maybe you've also seen it. I think it was in the popular press that actually looking at your own picture, at your own video recording while you talk is apparently not good. So that's because it distracts people or whatever. So that's possibly some kind of innovation that will find its way into software as well. So I think COVID, horrible, but possibly has opened eyes towards new issues that can be addressed with technology. How do I connect that to our own research? So actually, what we saw when we looked into frontline innovation is that there's exactly this serendipity of doing something else that brings up the best ideas. So actually, the company that we studied, the way they implemented frontline innovation is actually not through a specific. The way they implemented these moves is actually not with a specific focus on innovation, but actually rather have the employees move between factories because they help problem solving. So imagine you have a manufacturing network, and maybe one of your plants faces throughput issues in a molding process. That plant is going to try to solve that, but maybe they can't come up with a solution, and then someone from a different plant comes in and helps. And these are these 2-week visits that we talked about earlier. And actually, what we see is that this deep embedding into the visited factory creates, kind of a channel of communication that is very natural, that allows the two factories essentially to exchange knowledge, and that also creates the serendipity to come up with ideas. Just because innovation is not the core focus here, the focus of this transfer between the plants is to help solve a problem, but then innovation is kind of a natural thing that kind of comes next to it. So kind of leaving your comfort zone, putting yourself into a new situation, that's where the best ideas come about, both COVID as well as frontline innovation.
Actually, those are some of the things I found absolutely fascinating about your study, because 2 weeks is such a short amount of time.
Yeah.
Organizations have traditionally thought of role transfers or movements as an employee development tool, not necessarily an innovation tool. So that was really interesting. That
exactly, especially not amongst frontline employees, right? So I think if you talk to an R&D manager, they will understand that if you have two R&D sites, it's a good idea to sometimes exchange people so they talk to each other. But no one has ever thought about how that would work with the frontline. And the effects that we find for this particular manufacturing company are absolutely mind-blowing in terms of cost savings that result out of something that's not even intended to kind of drive innovation.
That was, frankly, it completely blew my mind. So thank you.
Yeah, but if you think about it, just imagine if you work on the front line, right? And in 2 weeks, you're at a different factory. This is going to be incredibly interesting to you, right? You see, maybe they produce the same product, but with slightly different machines, different colleagues. I mean, it must be a hotbed for innovation, actually, if you think about it. So yeah, it makes sense that we found it.
And that's how, as you spoke about it a little while ago, they go back not just with knowing, the know-how part of it, but having seen the same thing being done, maybe with some differences, they get a deeper understanding of the know-why, or have the capacity to be innovative month on month. I mean, that's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about manufacturing these days, I think an incredibly hot topic is automation, right? So how much do you even still need your frontline employees? And I think this offers a different perspective on it, right? Rather than just seeing, your frontline staff as a cog in the machine, essentially as a human robot, see them for what they're good at, right? Use them for their ability to come up with ways to improve the business, right? So I think this is kind of a change of mindset also for maybe senior managers, rather than just focusing on the specific part of the work that an employee does, see them in a kind of broader picture. How can they contribute to the company's bottom line beyond just that? Yeah,
as potential innovators and not just responsible for a set of tasks.
Exactly. Because we have this idea database from the company that we studied, and we looked at the ideas, and no machine learning model, no AI could ever have come up with these ideas. So that's human ingenuity is really is really our main strength, right? We're not the best at performing the same task repetitively. That's not what we do. What we're good at is creativity and coming up with innovative solutions to problems.
That's a very, very important insight, actually. And it ties very well with the question which Dr. Lapsing has. He asks, how relevant is automation and AI for the future of work?
Yes, perfect. Yeah, yeah. As I said, I think automation it will happen. No questions asked, right? So the question, for senior executives, what you have to ask yourself is, how do I keep jobs for humans? How can I make use of this potential that my staff, my employees have, in a way that benefits the company? And I think a big part of that will be creativity and innovation.
Gautam Sashathal, organizations that talk about frontline innovation and invite ideas. However, where this fails is in the communication loop, the implementation, and most importantly, and perhaps having the idea generator head a project, however junior he or she might be. How can organizations improve on the implementation process and create a virtuous?
That's a fantastic question. Fundamentally, this kind of goes back to so you first have to start with a process that independently evaluates the ideas. Because if you have a committee of managers evaluate ideas, usually the ideas that get selected are the ones by the managers. Actually, another colleague of mine has done research in that. It's the ideator's bias, he calls it. People like their own ideas best. It's natural. So what the company did that we studied is actually they created this independent unit tasked centrally with evaluating all ideas, and the only thing they look at is data, is numbers, and then there's another unit that kind of executes the implementation. So if you essentially separate that process and make it a specific part of your business, that will make sure that you really implement the ideas that make a difference rather than the ideas that come from the most powerful person in the room.
And that's probably where analytics would play a role.
Absolutely, yeah. So of course this costs money, no question. You have to have FTE looking at data and ideas. If you can use analytics to make this faster and more efficient, fantastic. That's the way forward.
Rahul says amazing. I agree, Rahul. Dr. Lapsing, in one of the responses about a worker caught stealing away a soap packet at the factory gate, we were asked what the management should do to the worker. It is a question of character of employees. How would you react to such cases as a future challenge to do business? That's one slightly outside your area, but in case you want to have to.
Yeah, no, I think, in the end, we're all humans, right? Most of us are good, right? And I think, especially if this is, the first time something like this happens, I think you should react with kindness and find a situation that makes it clear to the employee that this is not acceptable behavior, of course, but also that, keeps him or her within the community and within the company and tries to, find a way for him or her to improve him or herself within the company and within society to stay a part of it, right? I'm generally, we should be careful when we judge people, right? Because none of us are without failure, and everyone makes mistakes. And the way to kind of create a functioning society is to forgive sometimes and help people improve.
Lovely. That's a very humanistic approach.
Yeah.
So with that, Philip, we come to the end of our conversation today, and I'll tell you, there are just so many ideas that I thought were extremely impactful, both from the research that you've done as well as our conversation today. I think it brings back the spotlight to frontline innovation. And if some of the data you suggest is actually correct, that in large organizations, something like 75% of innovation actually happens through frontline employees, then it's an area which you would only sort of overlook at your own cost. So I thought that was amazing. I loved the fact that sometimes, and particularly in the example you studied, making innovation happen was as simple as moving someone from one team to another location for just 2 weeks. And the fact that if you did that, not only would you have an immediate gain in terms of problem solved, but that would be a gain that would continue over a period of time, month on month, is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
Um, there hasn't been as much focus on frontline innovation. As a result, a lot of the methods which are used in shop floors really date back to some of the Japanese systems of manufacturing, who were exceptional, and they've been exceptional at managing quality. But what I also heard you speak about today is how, with analytics, innovation analytics coming into, you know, uh, what will eventually become mainstream, it really opens out the door for frontline innovation to take center stage, because that can help us identify ideas, evaluate them, and then track them. And that's a whole other um, process that I think has been so overlooked.
Yeah. Well, it's been fantastic. Thank you very much for having me on the show. I think it was a real pleasure to talk about these topics, and also the questions I thought were excellent. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you. And for everyone who's joined us today, do join us next week. We have Amit Ranjan joining us. Amit Ranjan is the co-founder of SlideShare. And if you've used LinkedIn, I'm sure you've used SlideShare at some point. He's also the architect of DigiLocker. So we'll have a lot to discuss next Saturday. Do join us. And with that, we come to an end of today's episode. Thank you so much.
Thanks.